All right, welcome everybody to Meet Our Contributors for December 2019. This is the last Meet Our Contributors for the year. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. Meet Our Contributors is a live stream where we bring Kubernetes contributors uh, on this live stream, and then you can ask them questions: what it was like to do their first contribution, how to do a pull request. We've had architect diagrams with a whiteboard, basically anything that would help you contribute to Kubernetes or get started with Kubernetes. So we've got a bunch of questions lining up in chat. Welcome those of you joining us on YouTube. The way it works is hop into #meet-our contributors on Kubernetes Slacks, which if you follow the directions below in the YouTube link, you should be able to see there. And then just ask your question. And then we're going to ask our panel of experts the questions, and they're going to talk about their experiences, how they got started contributing to Kubernetes, and all that kind of good stuff. So please give us a sound check. How do we sound? Feel free to type. Remember that your chat is being broadcast along with everyone's faces. And also, please remember that the Kubernetes Code of Conduct is in effect, so please be excellent to each other. All right, with that, let's do some quick introductions. Let's do Ihor, Taylor, and Kelsey finish us off.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Ihor Dvoretsky. I'm a developer advocate at Cloud Native Computing Foundation, the CNCF. I'm also a contributor to Kubernetes community for a pretty long time, since Q4 2015, so around 4 years. And I'm mostly focused on the non-coding areas of Kubernetes. So I used to be a chair of SIG-PM, a co-founder and chair of SIG-PM. I'm actively involved into the life of C contributor experience these days and many other areas of the Kubernetes community, besides the general CNCF ecosystem. So happy to assist in these areas today. Taylor, want to go next?
Absolutely. My name is Taylor Dolezal. I work at Walt Disney Studios. I mostly work with the systems engineers, developers, and we're growing out our site reliability engineering team. I got started with Kubernetes about a year ago, I'd say, working with the SIG release group. I got to serve on releases 1.14, 15, and 16. 1.17, I moved over to the release manager associate position, so I get to work with a bunch of fun people in that camp. Other than that, yeah, it's raining in LA. It's interesting. I don't know what this is.
I guess I'm up next.
Yes, sir.
So I'm Kelsey Hightower, kind of been around this Kubernetes community for a long time. Still learning something every day. And yeah, other than that, I'm a minimalist, so I'll keep it short.
Awesome. And with that, everyone, please keep your questions about whether Baby Yoda is rendered on Kubernetes to the end of the show. We would appreciate that. Real quick, you can also ask questions anonymously. So if there's a question that you want to ask and you prefer not to, you prefer to remain anonymous, feel free to PM me in Slack. I am Castro J.O. Laura, welcome. Laura has the first question of the day to kick us off. Says, what was your first contribution experience like to the Kubernetes projects? Can you talk about the differences you'd expect in that first time experience from someone who has done a lot of contributions to big open source projects versus someone who maybe has done only a few or worked on smaller projects?
Yeah, I'll start. I was contributing back when there was a very small number of contributors and the project was less complex, right? I remember I could read all of the source code in one repository. You can almost follow the code from its entry point to what it's actually doing. And there were a lot of things to work on, right? We didn't have a lot of native cloud support. There was no volumes. There was no namespaces. And at that time, we didn't know if Kubernetes was going to be the thing it is today. So any contribution was super welcome. There was a lot less competition between people working in the same places. So I found that one pretty, I would say, easy in terms of finding what to actually work on. And I think the last thing is, what is your motivation, right? So at that time, I was working at CoreOS, and I really wanted to make it easier for CoreOS nodes to register themselves, created a cloud provider. And I think the hard parts now is, what is your motivation, right? Some people contribute to build up their reputation in the community. Some people work at a provider or maybe a vendor and they want to make their support a little better. So I think going forward, what is your motivation for contributing? Maybe you're scratching your own itch, you ran into a bug. That's probably the best place to start versus trying to prove yourself by working on the scheduler or some very complex component.
Absolutely agree. Like I said, I got started a little bit earlier this year, so the Kubernetes project was much further along. Before then, I really enjoy the community. I really enjoy outreach, and was looking at kind of the ways to get involved with Kubernetes project and kind of work towards a cloud native ambassador to have a little bit more tooling and help in terms of that outreach goal of mine. And so when I started working with the Kubernetes project, I believe it was somebody sent out a tweet about shadowing for the 1.14 release. And then I got to see all of the different roles that you could serve on the project. And the communications role really struck my eye. And so I applied to that and luckily got accepted. And then at that point in time, got pulled right into the release. And it was just a very active, very engaged community. Before then, it was, I've opened up a couple of pull requests on smaller projects, whether it be a typo or just a conditional that needs fixing, but very, very different experience, like was hinted at, in terms of amount of people that are ready to kind of talk with you and engage with you, and a lot more process rather than just a nice little, here's how you submit a PR. You have you have handbooks, and you have just kind of, it's a lot harder to not know what's going on if you start looking at the documentation, if you know where to start looking.
Yeah, I think the key for most people is just get that first pull request in. Like, I don't care how legendary your software development skills are. You're probably just better off starting with the smallest change you can and get it merged 100%, right? And that way you can go through the process, sign your CLA, see it get shipped, that kind of thing. And then you're ready for your next one, because I guarantee you, if you start changing code in Kubernetes, that process is a lot more involved than changing documentation. So start small, celebrate all the wins, not just the big ones.
Exactly. I was about to say the same, Kelsey. So my first contribution was, as I mentioned before, it was like around 4 years ago. I still remember it was November 2015, and Kubernetes 1.0.6 was the actual release of that time. So it was like way a long time ago, and we definitely had a way smaller code base, and we also had a way smaller group of people who were actually considered as the contributors to this community. And reminding myself, so my first contribution was fixing a few lines in the documentation and a few lines in a bash script that allowed us to deploy the Kubernetes cluster on libvirt with CoreOS nodes. So it's currently deprecated, so you won't be able to find that script these days in Kubernetes documentation. But 4 years ago, it was a pretty popular way of deploying Kubernetes using the bash scripts. So especially for the testing purposes. And I was trying to do the same for myself. So I was trying to deploy Kubernetes on my machine, on my cluster. I had some issues with doing that, and I figured out that the bash script is inconsistent a bit, and the documentation also needs some work in it. So it was my first contribution, and that was my first PR. And I still remember that PR, and I still remember how excited I was after it was merged. I remember multiple contributions that myself and other folks together with me we did after that, but still the first PR is the most important. But another thing that I'd like to highlight, that not only the code base, not only writing code or even writing documentation is the efficient way, is the only efficient way to get started with Kubernetes as a contributor. There are multiple people who are successful product managers, for example, in their daily life, and they would like to contribute some experience from their product management world to Kubernetes. There are people with some successful marketing experience or people management experience. So we definitely may need more people in every single area of Kubernetes, and that's definitely not only writing some code into Kubernetes repo on GitHub where code only sits.
All right, moving on. MBD asks, and this is a popular question. I'm really interested in the panel's opinions on this. Sometimes it's hard to get in a particular task due to the complexity of the system and our lack of knowledge of the developer. Are there any cata code or workshops provided by the communities and SIGs focused on certain parts of Kubernetes? AK, what's the correct way to get your hands dirty? And if you don't know about any of these programs that SIGs might do, maybe highlight how you figured out, what section.
Yeah, I would say patience is number one because this stuff is hard. I mean, it's probably even harder now. Like, you got to have patience. This is why I think having a clear motivating factor about why you're contributing is going to save you from getting frustrated. It's not a competition. The goal isn't to try to get to the top of the top contributors list. The goal is to try to do something meaningful to yourself, maybe to your company or to your own situation, because there's a lot of contributors. So I think the most important contributions you can do are the ones where you're personally motivated to do them, whether it's a very small bug or a big overhaul. You're going to need that. The reason why I say that is that you're going to have to go and seek someone out, I think, that can help pair with you and be also as patient with you that you're going to need to be with yourself. And also, there's going to be a lot of homework you need to do, meaning if you jump into Slack and you ask someone to explain how the scheduler works, that's really not fair to the person that you're asking, that they're going to, because they'll probably get asked this 1,000 times. You're going to have to spend a lot of time bumping your head against the wall, progressively learning, and then come back with very specific questions so that people can just show that, hey, you're meeting them halfway. I'm and other people are probably more likely to give you a little bit more help if we see you kind of putting some personal investment into the game.
And Kelsey, just a follow up for you. How did you do this? Did you just set up your own cluster and start breaking it? Did you just go through the code? Did you have a mentor?
Yeah, so I just started like assuming that, and I've been contributing to projects for a very long time and been a maintainer of very many projects. So I said, hey, let me first get Kubernetes installed, right? Like, let's just get it installed and then break it and ask myself, what do I not like about the current setup? And then I would drill down to try to find the place in code that's causing the thing I don't like. And until I can find that place in the code base, that's the root cause of the thing, then that's what I would do on my own as far as I could. And if I couldn't find that place, then my question would be very targeted. Where in the code base is this happening? And then I would go back to do a little bit more self-study. And then what that showed maintainers is that, wow, this person is really investing their time. I can tell that they're really trying as much as they can before they are kind of asking questions. So that was my approach. Install it, break it, find out where the break is, and then ask very specific questions and be patient.
Taylor, how about you?
I definitely agree with Kelsey. It's in terms of, I'd say it's definitely twofold. I do know of this fantastic project by, I think the guy's name is Kelsey Hightower, Kubernetes the Hard Way. It was a really good project to take a look at to try to, if your goal is to understand what the cluster does, how to set it up, what are the components within. There is another book out right now. I think it's at manning.com, Core Kubernetes. And that's also, I'm really excited to see that there is more material coming out about Kubernetes and kind of what are the components underneath or behind the curtain. That has been difficult to get a sense of for a while. The other thing is I've really liked taking a demo project and just getting that set up and, again, breaking it, seeing how these components fit together, understanding it, because if you're just copying and pasting what's on Stack Overflow, it is, you can do it, but it's really hard to understand what's going on. The other thing that's really helpful too is, again, not slacking somebody directly and having them answer a popular question that they get asked, but trying to find the special interest group that's going on. Those are open to everybody. And so you can come, you can just listen, you can just kind of be a fly on the wall and hear what's going on. What are people talking about in SIG auto scaling? What are people talking about in SIG PM? What's happening within these different groups that are talking about Kubernetes. And you might hear something that's relevant to what you're looking for. It's also worth looking at those agendas. Those are in Google Docs as well. So it is difficult to try to get a sense and a bearing of what at times, what you might want to actually listen for. But there are always people out in the community. I think that's an easier question to ask and get an answer on that, what the schedule is, but where can I go to hear about it?
And another way to get started with some playground and something like that, if you have a chance to attend KubeCon Cloud Native Con event, so during the last few iterations, during the last few years, the group of people are running their contributor summit the day before or the next day after the event. And during the last few iterations, we also had the new contributor workshop happening there. So this workshop was intended for those people who have nearly zero or some basic knowledge about Kubernetes, about contributing to Kubernetes, about building something or breaking something within Kubernetes. And they would like to get some new experience with that, having some mentorship from the more experienced people, more experienced contributors from the community. So if you have a chance, if you are planning to visit next KubeCon in Amsterdam or the next one in North America or the next one in Shanghai, so we plan the new contributor workshops there. So please follow the announcements from the community, and it's an extremely good way to get started with Kubernetes. Not only doing something on your own, but to get started with Kubernetes um, as a community in the community way.
Mm-hmm. And before moving on, I would like to point out that some SIGs do have onboarding programs. So SIG Cluster Lifecycle this year did a onboarding session where they just had a whole bunch of new people showed up, and they sat there and kind of walked through the major parts of the SIG, how they're organized, and kind of gave everyone kind of a heads up on a baseline on how to contribute to that SIG. And that's something we can definitely do a better job across the project. Jeff has a question. Sustainability seems to be a hot topic before and during KubeCon. Do you think the community and the project is sustainable as it is? What can be done to ensure the health of the project and or community? Good question, Jeff.
Yeah, I'll start. Sustainability. I think my keynote was kind of around this idea around marathons. I think the most important thing is the sustainability of yourself. Forget the project. You personally make sure that this whole thing is sustainable for you. The project will take care of itself. And I think for the project itself, I think Kubernetes did a really good job around that 1.0 timeframe, defining what it is and what it isn't. What's core, what's an extension. And I think CRDs really help with the sustainability of the project. The fact that you can create a custom resource definition, have that feel like a first-class part of Kubernetes without it having to live in the core. And I think that's kind of the number one thing that we did to make the project sustainable for the long term and to give the entire ecosystem a place to either do development inside of the core or outside of the core. And I think as long as we keep those principles high, then the project will have sustainability.
Right, and to it, so a few years ago, we had only one repo. It was Kubernetes on GitHub. Today, we have a bit less than 100 repos that are spread across multiple GitHub organizations. So that's actually the follow-up after those processes that Kelsey described. When we, as the community, we decided what is the core and what are the organic parts of the ecosystem of the Kubernetes project itself. But besides that, we also have the huge ecosystem around Kubernetes, but these projects are not sitting within any of the Kubernetes GitHub official repos. Some of these projects would be even the proprietary solutions from the third-party companies, but they still form this project as the huge ecosystem.
I really do like that too, in terms of the metaphor of the marathon. I have seen a couple people within the Kubernetes community just take on a lot and just just enter into burnout, which has been unfortunate. I'd like to see that there are kind of that inherent mentoring within a lot of the special interest groups, and in which you'll have shadows and people who kind of watch the process, and then people rotate out. And even people that are experienced, I like that there's the opportunity for them to become like an emeritus lead. And so they can still kind of offer guidance and help and still be there, but they don't have to be, in the weeds doing the day-to-day or the really nitty-gritty work. It's so important. Everyone that comes to Kubernetes and wants to help out, that's an incredible thing. But don't take yourself for granted, and don't burn up all the gas in your tank, so to speak. because it's that's not worth it. And then at that point in time, you put yourself in danger, and that, and then you kind of you whether you want to or not, you're kind of forced to leave the community within that capacity. So it's always important to help train up other people and just get more people involved when it comes to sustainability. I'm really happy to see that that's kind of, it seems to me in the groups I'm in, that's taking root so far.
I want to double down on what Taylor just said. This idea of sharing knowledge, right? When I wrote Kubernetes the hard way, and the reason why I maintained it for years, I watched Tim Hawkins do it, Brian Grant do it. You need to almost teach everyone else everything you know so that they can continue where you need to eventually leave off. And I think that is like the number one thing you can do. So if you're an expert in some part of Kubernetes and you want to see this project sustain, go and seek out others, write down what you know, write a book, write a blog post, write some notes, whatever you can do to leave that breadcrumb trail for the next group of people that come in. It's just going to be a game changer for the project.
Okay, Jeff is also asking another question. This is going to be my favorite one. What was your biggest pain point when joining the community as a contributor? Just tell me your horror stories.
Well, when I joined, there was no docs on how to install the damn thing. Like literally, it was, I remember the press release coming out, Brendan Burns did the, presentation at DockerCon. I was like, oh, that's sweet. I'm working at CoreOS at the time. We have Fleet. So I'm like, how does this thing compare to Fleet? Let me just go install it. And I go to GitHub and it's like, README. Hey, awesome project. Figure it out. I was like, what the hell is this? So I spent like 2 days just grinding, trying to figure out how to install. What the hell is a kubelet? What is the scheduler piece? Where does it go? There was no authentication at the time, right? The API server has no RBAC, no auth whatsoever. You're supposed to put Nginx in front of it. So I spent a couple of days getting to work on VMware Fusion. And I was like, I don't know if this is the future, if this is how people are going to be installing this thing. So it was super early on, super alpha. But to me, that was kind of the biggest problem, was that there was just no clear guidance on how to put the system together.
Was there etcd back then as well for like a backing store?
Did you so etcd, so etcd was there in the very beginning, but I had a lot of experience coming from CoreOS, so I kind of knew how that part worked. But you got to remember, there was all these other binaries, controller manager, just so many little pieces that you had no idea what the flags were, right? You're really literally running binaries and saying, oh, what does that flag mean? What does it do? How does it even talk to Docker? So it was an incredible time where there's just lack of documentation. I think in some parts of the system, you have a very similar experience where there's a lot of documentation to the point where it's almost hidden.
Taylor, how about you?
I'd say just really the drinking from the fire hose. So I was lucky that there was a good amount of documentation around when I started getting involved with the community. But it was just I got really worried, because a lot of the time, you really do kind of have to think about it as starting a new job. You give yourself a little bit of slack for the first week or two, to kind of get your bearings about you and understand where the wiki is, where all the documentation is, where any perceived or actual gaps are within your understanding, so you can kind of help fix those gaps. And so I'd say that was really the biggest thing, is kind of just finding my footing and finding out what is expected of me in this role, and how do I want to, what's the most meaningful way I can help out. I'd say I was lucky that there weren't too many technical hurdles or anything like that when I first started, but I have heard quite a few horror stories on that front.
I would say that my biggest pain point was to understand how inclusive and welcoming this community is. So Kubernetes was my first project, was the first project of this scale where I was considering contributing to. I had some experience with the different big open source projects, and I don't want to say that I had issues, but I haven't felt that those communities were so welcoming for the new people, especially for the new people with some not so good knowledge of, for example, programming, as I'm not a programmer at all. So I have some different skills that might be useful for some community, but I wasn't sure if my skills could be useful for this community. But when I showed up at my first SIG meeting, and when I showed up at my first community meeting, I was extremely excited about people who were surrounding me on the video call and how I felt that there are different ways how can I contribute here, how my current knowledge, which is not, again, which is not the coding knowledge, but knowledge in the different spaces, in different areas, can help here and can help move forward this project. So that was the biggest pain point at the beginning, but that was my probably the most exciting point later after that. After I figured out all the things, how do these things work in this community.
Okay, awesome. We're about halfway through. If you're just joining us on YouTube, this is the Meet Our Contributors for December 2019. Follow the instructions below to ask a question in the Slack channel, which we're live streaming here on the right, whatever side that is. So welcome. We are still taking questions. We're up on questions. Is there a, Marky posted a link of a playlist that we have of code walkthroughs that we try to do these sessions. So those of you out there, if you know a little piece of code or something or part of Kubernetes, and you want to share that with the community, we hop on a Zoom call, I record it for you, and we try to crank those out. So definitely check out that playlist that Marky posted, and we'll give the audience a few minutes here to ask some questions. Don't worry, Troy, I know you got a question. So I have a question for mostly Taylor, but all of you else. So a lot of people do get paid to work on Kubernetes full time, and I know I've been hearing a lot, especially this KubeCon. It seems really like a high bar. It's like, well, how am I going to even compete with these people where they're doing all this stuff? And here I am with a few hours a week. Taylor, you have a day job and you just launched probably one of the biggest products that you'll ever launch in your entire career. How do you manage this? What do you tell your boss? Like, how does this work? Because you led the release notes, or not the release notes, but the comms team during this too, right?
Correct. Yeah. So that was a really big concern of mine, was because there, the company that I work for, obviously there's a lot of IP, there's a lot of there is an open source process, and so there are people that I can kind of talk with and get involved with and make sure all the lawyers are happy. But when it comes down to that, I did want to pick a role that didn't kind of impact that directly. So I write code. I work with that for my day job. I manage sites and try to make sure everything's reliable and resilient and robust. But it's one thing to do that, from a 9 to 5 or beyond capacity, and it can be very taxing. Again, we talked about burnout. You want to be sensitive to yourself and make sure that you're not kind of burning the candle at both ends. The comms group really helped me out with that, and working with SIGDocs really helped with that, because I could go home and kind of be a technical editor and review things. That was really fantastic to do. Right now, I don't get paid to work on open source, so this is absolutely a passion project. And so that to me, that makes it a little bit more meaningful, and that kind of gets me fired up. So even if you have like a rough day or just a huge block of meetings, taking a look at Kubernetes code and getting to talk with all the friends and contributors that I have in that capacity are really fun.
I can speak from my experience. So now I have a day job that is absolutely related to Kubernetes because I work at CNCF. But before CNCF, I was working at a different company, which was also the open source company. But at that point of time, they had nearly zero focus on Kubernetes. But coincidentally, the good point for me was my location in my time zone. So for those who don't know me, I'm based in Ukraine, and we have 10 hours difference with the Pacific time zone. So, and a few years ago, today's it's not so big case these days, but a few years ago, Kubernetes development mostly North American time zone centric, specifically the Pacific time zone centric. So most of the meetings have happened in a Pacific friendly time. Most of the conversations in the mailing list conversations have happened in a Pacific friendly time. And that was good for me to have my day job in the regular Ukrainian day hours, and in the night to have some conversations with the Kubernetes community. That meant that I had to spend more of my personal time on doing things for Kubernetes as well, but it also meant that I shouldn't use my business time to work on Kubernetes as an open source project. So that was the good point for me. after that, I was able to switch these things off, and after that, I was able to work in Kubernetes on a full time as my day job, even before CNCF. But beginning as the person who was living in a different time zone and was able to handle the things from the different time was surprisingly, but it was a good thing for me.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kelsey.
I was good. So competing is just going to be a losing battle. You're just going to lose. If you're trying to compete, you're just going to lose, period. I don't care if you're not competing with anyone else in a particular part of the code base. So I think the right way to approach it, if you want specific support for a GPU, let's just throw that one out there. There's two ways of going about it. You can get someone else to do it. Like you write up what needs to happen, what the UX looks like, what it feels like, and open an issue. Bonus points if you don't have to touch your keyboard after that. Like someone goes and says, hey, I work at said GPU provider, and I just merged the PR that does exactly what you want. Like your boss should give you a gold star, right? Just put it on your t-shirt when you walk into work. Bam, you did it. That's the most efficient thing you can do, is be very clear on what needs to happen. And I think most of the Kubernetes process these days, you have to do that step first, right? You have to describe what you want and why. So if you take care of that part and someone else writes the code, that is equally a great contribution to the project. Now, if no one wants to work on that thing, then things get a little bit harder. Now you're going to have to be the one that takes on full responsibility for getting that thing to come to life. And that's just going to be a bigger time investment on your part. So you're kind of competing with your own priorities and your own time. So does it make sense for you to be doing this? And then sometimes it will, and you'll see it through, even if it takes 6 months to a year. You're competing with the ability to get it done. I think it's the most important thing to look at.
All right. Laura asks, kind of a silly question. There are no silly questions. But I always find a gigantic ecosystems a bit intimidating to get started with. Do y'all still get a bit lost with all the different projects and code names across the ecosystem, especially as new ones coming in all the time? Like when you see the landscape, I'm picturing the picture of all these logos.
Well, I have to drop in a second, and I apologize. Okay. This is kind of a last minute thing for me. So I'm going to answer this one and then politely drop off. There are too many projects, just like there's too many things in the world. And what I've learned is my trick is most of the fundamentals are the same. Every time I look at a new logo that shows up on the landscape and I peel back the covers, it's typically something either moving bytes around in a certain way with some rules or policy, or something running some process on something. That's it. Those are pretty much the fundamentals. If you understand the fundamentals, then the logos start to make sense. Then you can start to put a different question to the logos. Why does this project exist? Maybe it's trying to make a thing that was once expensive cheap. Maybe it's trying to foster a new set of extensions and exploratory learning that we can do in public. Some of these projects have really great APIs, FluidD, Kubernetes itself. So I think asking the why, is this thing now showing up, re-implementing the very fundamentals that I understand, then none of this feels overwhelming to me. The only thing that's overwhelming now is why the hell are there so many logos? And because some of these things consolidate, like we saw with the open tracing world, right? Mm-hmm. There's some overlapping projects that just really need to really figure it out and maybe combine forces, and I think we'll be better off. So that's my answer. I really enjoyed hanging out with you all. I got to drop. Thank you.
Thanks for stopping by, Kelsey. Always welcome. All right, we're going to move on. Sorry, DKYP. With Kelsey's time, he's not going to be able to answer your question. Jeff asks, how much time per week do you spend on OSS Kubernetes-specific work, regardless of who signs your checks? Great
question. I'd say, honestly, it's the best technical answer ever is it depends, right? That's definitely an answer. I would say, honestly, it does vary. I'd say anywhere from 5 to 20 hours, depending on, how much time you have, personally or on the weekend. But all of it, fantastic. Definitely worth it.
Ihor, how about you?
I would say that I spent all of my time and even more. And not only on Kubernetes, but also on the, not only on the Kubernetes or even the other CNCF projects, but on the different open source projects as well.
Yeah, so I have a sub question for you, Ihor, though.
All right.
So assuming, in the CNCF, how like percentage wise, how much is Kubernetes and how much are like the other ones? Like, do you sit there and say, I'm spending too much time on Kubernetes this week, I should be spending more time on Fluentd or something? Or do you kind of just...
I would say that I spent most of my time on Kubernetes and on Kubernetes related projects like Helm. So Helm is probably the second project in my business time that I'm focused on, the CNCF project. I'm also focused on some different CNCF-wide stuff, on the foundation-wide stuff, but that's open source related. But even on my, on my non-business hours, I try to spend most of my time on the open source projects, even not as a contributor, but just as a consumer, just to play with the newest version of their Linux distribution X, or try some new tool that was released last week to solve some of your needs. Today, I was exploring Arch Linux Wiki for the first time in a few years. Probably I'll come back to Arch Linux on my sandbox machine in a few days. Let's see.
I've been experimenting with Flatcar Linux, but not on work time, but just to add to myself. For me, it depends on the cycle. I have a set amount of work every week, right? The community meeting, programs like this that are kind of, they never change, right? I'm like that predetermined workload in your cloud that you want to pre-allocate. And then depending on the cycle, if I'm on the release team, I'll do more upstream. Lately though, however, I've been more cycled internally as well. As my company has been acquiring other companies and stuff, there's like a lot of people that like need help figuring out how to onboard into Kubernetes. So we kind of figuring all that stuff out. So this cycle is probably the least amount of time I've worked directly upstream, which I'm sad about, but I will fix in January. So hopefully that answers the question, because you got to cycle in and out, sometimes you just got to do something a little bit different every time. Let's see, what other questions do we have? We have about 15 minutes. We don't have to go the other way. Let's see what the audience says. Audience, are you having a good time so far? Please feel free to type your feedback. We always love it. Are you going to talk about Baby Yoda now, Taylor, or?
Yes. So I got to work with awesome people, kind of upstream to the whole Disney Plus launch. So Disney is a giant place, and so there are a bunch of different sections. There are people that run the parks. There are people that run the direct to consumer products. And so I work for the studios. We create the content, and then we ship over that content to the direct to consumer groups. And so I don't. They do have a tech blog. I honestly, I don't know the answer, but they do have a tech blog on Medium, and I believe the answer is there. So I'll do the shameless plug and kind of direct everybody over to that direction. But I don't have the link, but I can. Awesome. I'll share that out later.
I was actually expecting that for you to be unable to answer anything. I was like, wow, he's actually talking about...
That's not the question you were looking for. I think okay. I did that right.
It's okay. No spoilers on this show. Jeff has a silly question. What do you like to see at the Amsterdam Contributor Summit? Actually, did both of you go to the Contributor Summit this time? When did I run into you, Taylor? Was it at the Contributor Summit or after? I don't remember.
So I got out Monday. I didn't get out Sunday, unfortunately, but okay. I saw the pictures, so I felt like I just mentally photoshopped myself there. I felt like it felt like the group.
Let me rephrase Jeff's question then, since you both have been contributing virtually for a long time, and I know Ihor has been there physically, so I'm gonna ignore you for a second, Ihor. Pretending that you actually get to physically sit down with like a laptop and do the kind of high bandwidth discussions. What are some of the things that you could do in real life that you kind of can't do asynchronously via like a GitHub PR, right? Like, let me just encompass that to all of KubeCon in general, right? Just give me your KubeCon thoughts on what it was like to actually meet space with people to work together that way.
That was really incredible. I mean, and I think that everybody, I feel like everybody says that, where it's like, it was just so great to sit down and talk to people. Really, it is great putting, a name to a face and an actual body, because you typically just see the head. But it was just kind of great to really talk to all the people that I've worked with, yourselves included, and kind of just talk about who is this person behind, all of their contributions, and kind of getting a sense of who the entirety of that person is. I think that was a lot of fun, just to see likes, dislikes, and then just kind of go off on tangents. Typically, these meetings are very pointed, and we have a schedule to follow, and we need to get things done, and we have a shorter amount of time. So kind of having that unbounded time to talk about just about whatever was that I can't tell you how much I valued that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Over to you, Ihor. You've been to a lot of these now, though. So compare and contrast for me how San Diego is different.
I would say that San Diego was bigger than the previous one, and the previous one was bigger than the previous of the previous one. Mm-hmm. I remember my first KubeCon and my first contributor summit that happened the next day after the official final day of KubeCon. It was in Seattle 16. Mm-hmm. The legendary KubeCon with the president election combined. So we had around 1,000 people there at the big event at KubeCon itself. And I'd say that the demographics of the event there, most of people, not most, but many people who have attended that event as the attendees were also the contributors to Kubernetes. So I would say that that KubeCon itself was the scaled up portion of the contributor summit. We also had the contributor summit. It was called the developer summit, as far as I remember. We later named it the contributor summit. So it was the next day after the big event after KubeCon, and it was it has happened in like an extremely intimidating atmosphere. We had around maybe 20 or 30 people there, up to 50, not more. And we have been able to chat with each other, to meet every single person there in face-to-face during the whole day. And we were able to have some conversations, even having almost a single track of conversation. So that was the life of the Kubernetes community at the beginning. Today, we have the size of the Kubernetes Summit itself, around the size of their first KubeCon, or the similar events at the beginning of the Kubernetes life. And the funniest story that I remember from my first days, from my actually first day in Seattle at KubeCon, when I was checking into my hotel, I was staying in line before checking into hotel, and I never met almost any single person from the Kubernetes community before. That was my first KubeCon. I was contributing to Kubernetes for a long time, but there were just a few people from the community whom I had a chance to meet face-to-face before. So that was also my first event when I had a chance to meet all these people together face-to-face in the same place. And I was surprised that while staying in that line trying to check into my hotel, multiple people show up to me, raise their hand, and like told me, "Hi, Ihor, how you doing?" and so on. I was surprised. How do you know me? Like, how do you know my face? You only saw my photos. I was surprised about it. So I would say that that contributor summit these days also happening in the same atmosphere as we had contributor summits and somehow KubeCon itself a few years ago. Today KubeCon is notably different. We had around 12,000 people this time in San Diego, and the audience could be also different. We have way more end users. We have way more enterprise focus of Kubernetes itself these days compared to the old days, and that also means that we have more vendors there, more enterprise companies that are trying to consume the scene, but the group of contributors, the contributors still remain the same. People may be different because, as Taylor mentioned, we have the shadow program, we have different people who are stepping down, some people are stepping up, but the general ecosystem of the contributors still remains the same spirit, the same ways of conversations, and so on. So I'd like to see the same in Amsterdam, and I'd like to see the same at every single contributor summit that will happen by the end of the universe.
Okay, and last call for questions from the audience. It looks like we don't have any. So I'm going to finish it off with one final question. What's next for each of you? What's your next challenge in Kubernetes? What are your goals for the next 4 releases, Taylor? What's your plan?
To serve on all of them, to score all the points. No, yeah. I'm saying I really want to see the community grow. I want to kind of help feed into that. The more people that understand Kubernetes, even if it is in a distributed way, that's going to be incredible. Personally, I do want to kind of dig into the core now that I've got my footing about me, now that I've kind of got my handwritten map as far as which people can I talk to, which groups can I get involved with. I definitely want to understand more the core Kubernetes and find out components and pieces that I can actually start working on and talking with people about. So that's kind of my next level up personally, but and to just help anyone of you that needs help. If you need help orienting yourself, or if you have a question about who do I start talking to, here's some things I'm interested in. I'm more than happy to kind of help be a lighthouse and kind of point you in the right direction. So don't be a stranger, reach out. I'm more than happy to help you out on that front.
All right. Ihor, how about you?
Help Kubernetes wherever I can help.
All right. Yeah, that's a good way to say I'll be around, but I don't want to commit to anything. That's exactly what my answer is going to be. All right, Troy, leaving us some feedback. Everyone is very approachable and wants you to succeed at KubeCon. Contributor Summit was great, and the tooling around contributing is definitely getting better using Kind. I wonder if old Kelsey, when he got started, if he would have had Kind. Like, it's almost like a life changer compared to the stuff when I had to start. All right. And with that, thank you everyone for joining. Thanks, Laura, Troy, Mahesh, Gfi, DKYP, Vitanio, Destroyer, everyone who joined and asked questions. Really appreciate you all dropping by. And with that, this will conclude Meet Our Contributors for 2019. And we'll be back at the new year. Paris will be back, and she will let you know when the next one is. I'm going to guess it's going to be the first Wednesday, but who knows, because it's the first of the year. I think New Year's Eve is Tuesday or Wednesday. So we don't know how it's going to work out. So keep an eye on this space, and we will definitely let you know ahead of time. And with that, thanks, everyone. And we appreciate you all dropping by.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.